réunion numéro 35 du comité.
Welcome to meeting number 35 of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
On the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and express gratitude that we're doing important work of this committee on lands they've stewarded since time immemorial. I do also want to start by welcoming the two new members of our committee. Welcome the Honourable Hetty Fry, and welcome back Mr. D'Entremont as well. But today, pursuant to Standing Order 108, the committee is meeting to continue its study of recreational and traditional fishing for soft-shell clam. Et la réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sur FOPO.
Today's meeting is happening in hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members can participate in person or via Zoom.
All in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the table. The measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and protect the health and safety of all participants, but particularly the interpreters. And I can advise members that all witnesses appearing virtually have done the required technical testing. Just a few comments for the benefits of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those who are participating by video conference, make sure you click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Et en ce qui concerne l'interprétation.
For interpretation, for those of you on Zoom, the bottom of your screen, you can choose the floor, English or French. For those of you in the room, you can use your earpiece and select the channel you want to hear.
So with that, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. From the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, we have Evelyn Sue, Director General, Food Safety and Consumer Protection Directorate. From the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, we have Alistair Struthers, Director, Aquaculture Policy and Regulatory Affairs. And by video conference, we have Céline Godet, Regional Director General, Gulf Region, as well as Sylvain Vézina, Director General, Quebec Region. And from the Department of Environment, we have Joanne Volk, Director General, Environmental Science Directorate, as well as Arash Shas Savarani, Director, Emergencies and Marine Science Division. So with that, we're going to go into the witnesses' opening statements for 5 minutes or less, starting with Ms. Sue.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to appear before you today to speak to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's role in the Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program, or CSSP. The goal of the program is to minimize the risks of consuming contaminated bivalve shellfish such as oysters, mussels, and clams. This protects the health and safety of consumers, supports trade within Canada and internationally, and plays a key role in Canada's coastal and economic landscape. The scale of the CSSP is significant. It monitors more than 2,000 shellfish harvest sites along the 78,000 kilometers of coastline spread through the Pacific, Quebec, and Atlantic regions. The CFIA plays an important role in protecting the health and safety of Canadians and supporting trade by minimizing the risks associated with consuming contaminated shellfish. Under the CSSP, the CFIA runs a surveillance program that monitors shellfish harvest areas for harmful marine biotoxins. CFIA's Marine Biotoxin Monitoring Program begins once DFO and ECCC have completed the work to classify a site. The CFIA only conducts marine biotoxin monitoring in harvest areas that are appropriately classified for harvest. Based on the results of the laboratory analyses, the CFIA provides recommendations to DFO on whether the shellfish harvest areas should be closed or can reopen safely. The CFIA also licenses and inspects 272 parties that process, package, and label shellfish for export or interprovincial trade, as well as parties who import shellfish into Canada. As a science-based regulator, the CFIA verifies that license holders are meeting their food safety obligations and, when necessary, conducts food safety investigations and oversees recalls. The CSSP supports three distinct shellfish harvest sectors, each playing a vital role in Canada's coastal and economic landscape. The CFIA plays a role supporting each sector. The first is the commercial harvest sector. This includes shellfish harvested for interprovincial trade and exports, and it's valued at approximately $475 million annually. Aquaculture exports alone are estimated at $240 million a year, with the United States, the European Union, and Asia representing the major export markets. The integrity of this program is therefore not only a matter of public health, it is also a matter of economic significance for Canada's coastal communities and our international trade reputation. The second sector is harvesting for Indigenous food, social and ceremonial purposes. In addition to the existing support for Indigenous FSC, Budget 2024 allocated $25.1 million over 2 years to the CFIA, ECCC and DFO to expand program activities that support some coastal Indigenous communities access shellfish for food, social and ceremonial purposes. With this funding, the CFIA established new biotoxin surveillance stations and conducted biotoxin testing in the CFIA laboratories. By March 31st, 2026, the CFIA had signed 23 Memoranda of Understanding with First Nation communities and analysed approximately 700 samples for marine biotoxin hazards. The third sector is recreational harvesting. This includes traditional harvesting by local communities for personal consumption, recreation, and cultural or heritage purposes. Recreational harvesting remains an important cultural and community tradition, particularly in Quebec and Atlantic Canada. In closing, I would like to underscore that the success of the CSSP rests on the strength of federal collaboration and communities. No single department has the regulatory authority to deliver this program alone. The CFIA takes seriously its responsibilities to coordinate across partners, maintain the integrity of national standards, liaise with foreign authorities, and ensure that Canada's food safety system commands the confidence of Canadians and our trading partners around the world. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sue. Next, we will hear from Alistair Struthers for 5 minutes or less.
Mr. Chair, honourable members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. My name is Alistair Struthers, and I'm the Director of Aquaculture Policy and Regulatory Affairs with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I'm joined by my colleague Sylvain Vizina, the Regional Director General for the Department's Quebec region, and Céline Godette, the Regional Director General for the Gulf region, both of whom manage the fishery in their respective regions. We're also joined by colleagues from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Environment and Climate Change Canada, both of which play important roles in the overall management of the shellfish sector. Pêche et Océans Canada gère la récolte.
Fisheries and Oceans Canada manages shellfish fisheries in Quebec, including the Baie des Chaleurs, within the broader Gulf of St. Lawrence ecosystem. Shellfish fisheries in Quebec and Gulf regions include both wild and aquacultural activities and support commercial, recreational, Indigenous food, social, and ceremonial harvesting.
Managed through measures such as harvest seasons, minimum size limits, and daily fishing limits. Decisions related to access, expansion, or changes to shellfish harvesting opportunities consider not only resource sustainability, but also environmental conditions and food safety requirements, which can vary significantly by region and species. At the national level, DFO's fisheries management sector establishes the regulatory framework and policy direction, while regional offices implement these regulations and policies, applying them in a manner that reflects region-specific biological, environmental, and operational considerations. Le Programme canadien de contrôle de la salubrité.
The Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program, or CSSP, is a federal interdepartmental program delivered jointly by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Its primary objective is to protect public health by ensuring shellfish harvested in Canada are safe to consume, while also supporting Indigenous harvesting, domestic fisheries, and Canada's international trade obligations. Our partners will speak to their respective roles in the delivery of this program during their opening remarks.
Oceans Canada is responsible for opening and closing harvesting areas based on recommendations and evidence provided by federal program partners, and for informing the public accordingly. More broadly, Fisheries and Oceans Canada supports the long-term sustainability of shellfish harvesting through precautionary management, stock assessments where information is available, and effective licensing, compliance, and enforcement. Our Conservation and Protection Branch ensures compliance with shellfish harvest regulations, including the management of contaminated fisheries regulations in areas subject to closure or restrictions. Fisheries officers maintain a presence on the ground, investigate potential illegal harvesting, and work collaboratively with program partners to ensure that public health protections are respected. L'élargissement des possibilités de récolte.
The expansion of harvesting opportunities, including for soft-shell clams, is dependent on scientific testing, assessments, and sustained monitoring capacity. In the Baie des Chaleurs region, many shoreline areas have historically not been fully assessed under the CSSP or were classified conservatively due to limited or outdated data, the presence of multiple pollution sources, and the complex coastal morphology of the bay. At the same time, it is important to note that the CSSP's geographic coverage across Canada is prioritized based on public health risk and known harvesting activity. The program has experienced increasing demand over the past 2 decades, while core funding has remained relatively stable.
The importance of shellfish harvesting to coastal and Indigenous communities and is actively working with federal partners to improve program delivery. Recent targeted investments through Budget 2024 supported increased engagement in Indigenous communities and addressed long-term closures affecting food, social, and ceremonial harvesting. Additionally, federal partners are advancing modernization initiatives such as digital mapping tools to strengthen program efficiency. Fisheries and Oceans Canada remains committed to working collaboratively with our federal partners, provincial governments, Indigenous communities, and stakeholders to balance public health protection with sustainable access to shellfish resources. We would be pleased to respond to the committee's questions. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Struthers. And we're going to conclude with opening remarks from Joanne Volk for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and honourable members of the committee. My name is Joanne Volk. I'm the Director General of Environmental Science Services with Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'm joined by my colleague Arash Savarani, the Director for Emergency and Marine Science at Environment and Climate Change Canada. We're both responsible for managing the national and regional operations at Environment and Climate Change Canada for the Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today as part of your study on the recreational and traditional fishing for softshell clams, or Maya arenaria. I'm pleased to speak on the role of Environment and Climate Change Canada in supporting the Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program. As you just heard from our colleagues at the table, Environment and Climate Change Canada is a partner in this jointly led program, working in close collaboration with Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Notre responsabilité principale dans le...
Our primary responsibility within the program is to assess and monitor the sanitary quality of shellfish harvesting waters. This includes shellfish growing areas in Quebec, including the Baie des Chaleurs within the broader Gulf of St. Lawrence. This work is one of several essential elements towards reducing risks and maintaining public confidence in shellfish safety. We start by identifying potential sources of sanitary pollution. This involves comprehensive coastal surveys to identify both point and non-point sources of sanitary pollution, such as wastewater discharge, agricultural runoff, and failing septic systems. These surveys are supported by ongoing water quality monitoring, where we measure levels of fecal coliform bacteria, an indicator of sanitary pollution that may pose a risk to human health. Based on this evidence, ECCC makes recommendations to our CSSP partners on harvesting areas according to risk of sanitary contamination for bivalve shellfish.
Deteriorates, whether due to heavy rainfall, infrastructure failure, or other sanitary pollution-related emergencies, Environment and Climate Change Canada provides recommendations to our partners regarding temporary closures to protect human health. The Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program was originally designed with commercial harvesting in mind. Its structure reflects the need to support both food safety and international trade, including alignment with the United States. Like other food safety systems, it relies on multiple layers of protection to minimize risk. However, as your study highlights, shellfish harvesting in Canada is not limited to commercial activities. Recreational and Indigenous food, social and ceremonial harvesting are also vital, and they present distinct needs. In recent years, Environment and Climate Change Canada has taken important steps to improve program delivery. Grâce au financement du budget de 2024,
Through Budget 2024 funding, ECCC has expanded its engagement with Indigenous communities to support safer harvesting practices and to remove barriers to access shellfish harvest areas for food, social, and ceremonial purposes. These efforts have strengthened relationships and improved information sharing. Looking ahead, enhanced and improved program delivery will require continued collaboration with partners, provinces, Indigenous communities, and harvesters themselves. Environment and Climate Change Canada remains committed to its role in providing timely, science-based information on sanitary water quality of shellfish harvest areas to help reduce risks to human health and to support the sustainable use of shellfish resources for all Canadians.
Merci.
Thank you. And it would be a pleasure for us to answer your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Volk.
Thank you very much, Ms. Volk. And we'll start our first round of questions for 6 minutes. Mr. Arnold.
Thank the witnesses for being here. I want to start off, I'm not sure who might be able to answer the question, but how long would it take from the time that Environment Climate Change Canada identifies a possible or potential source of contamination until a sample is taken to the lab, and then it's determined whether an area is safe or not, and whether that still has to go through CFIA's testing of clams or mussels, mollusks, and then eventually it sounds like DFO makes a decision from that. So how much time would elapse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I'll try to answer briefly. I think from the time a pollution source is identified, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a sampling required. So, for example, if there is an event where there's a failure in a septic in a wastewater treatment system, if our modeling dictates that the risks are great, we may immediately advise DFO that there is a risk and an emergency closure is required. So it's not an automatic that a source of pollution equals sampling, and so that process is determined based on the risk. Sampling times, though, when we do sample, we have 30 hours from the time we sample to get the samples to the lab, analyze them. Within 24 hours, we have the data after that.
From that data, you're able to make a recommendation to DFO to close the area, or who makes that decision?
So thank you very much again for the question. If the data suggests that the levels are extremely high, that an emergency closure is required, we would be able to provide that recommendation right away to DFO.
It had been closed. How long would it take for sampling to go through that process, and then for a decision to be, or a recommendation made for DFO to be able to open an area?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again for this question. It kind of highlights the complexity of the process. A single sample cannot determine whether an area is safe or not. The data, when we detect a high level of contamination, we have some level of certainty in terms of the risk level. However, from an area that hasn't been tested, or let's say it's been closed for a long time because of testing, it may take up to 2 years of sampling before we can have certainty that the area has a consistent, safe pattern for reclassification and opening.
Okay, so literally less than 3 days to shut an area down, but up to 3 years to reopen an area, even if the testing is clear? That doesn't seem proportionate.
Thank you again for that question. It again highlights the complexity because when we do detect a bacteriological presence, that's evidence of pollution. However, if we don't detect bacteriological presence, that doesn't equate the absence of potential pollution from an area that can have collections 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. So for an opening, for a classification, we need a series of data sets that covers a variety of environmental conditions so that we can have that assurance of safety. An example would be, for example, an area where there could be outflows or runoffs that are sporadic. And so if we don't have that pattern of sampling over time, we may miss those opportunities to detect those risks.
Said you can identify a potential area and test it, and within 36 hours, it sounded like, or less than 3 days, 72 hours, be able to close a site. So this is what I'm getting at, is the complexity that seems to be involved here. There's 3 different government departments and agencies involved that all have to work together. They can shut an area down within hours or days, but it takes them 3 years potentially to open up an area. Can somebody square that circle? Because you just said it could take up to 3 years of testing. But if an area is tested clear for 6 months, for a year, why would it take another 2 years before that area could be open?
No wonder you got the separatists.
Thank you for the question. I'll try and clarify. So when an area is monitored in a consistent fashion and is normally open, and let's say there was a storm and we closed because of emergency runoff, and now the area is polluted, we know that this would typically happen this way owing to the pollution source work that I mentioned here, where we understand where the sources are coming in a particular sector. We've modeled it numerically to understand where the pollution will go, and we have a fairly good idea of how long it'll take to clean itself. This is an area that is being managed or monitored in a consistent fashion and would be open and closed due to an emergency. Those areas are opened fairly quickly after the events occur. In areas where we have consistent monitoring, they can open, I believe, my colleague can correct me, as soon as 7 days after the event, or 21 days after the event. The areas that remain closed for long, extended periods of time, and some of them have been closed for years, those are the areas where we would have to go back in, do a reevaluation of the pollution sources because they may have changed within that period of time, do additional work now to understand the flow of the pollution when it comes in, and resume a monitoring routine. The monitoring routine takes a while to build up a sufficient data set again to be able to statistically say with confidence that we understand what's going on in the area. So there's a difference between those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for being with us today. This soft-shell clam fisheries activity, well, it's something that's been happening in our area for some time. I started doing it with my grandfather, my father. I do it now with my children. And I can understand that for some people in my region, it's difficult for them to accept on a beautiful summer day that they can't perform this activity. And for some people who make a little bit of money from this year after year. And thank you for the clarification you provided on the reopenings. It doesn't necessarily always take 3 years. In some areas, it takes less time. So just to allow people from my region to understand what we're talking about, when we decide to close an area,
De la baie des Chaleurs, par exemple,
in the Baie des Chaleurs region, for example,
la sécurité.
we do it for the health and safety of the people who consume these mollusks. So perhaps Madame Godet could respond to this question. So in the entirety of the Baie des Chaleurs, and Madame Godet, you know the region, are tests done in all the little bays, or are these randomly done tests, such and such day in such and such area? So my question has to do with tests. Where are they done? Thank you.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
La baie des Chaleurs,
In terms of the Baie des Chaleurs and my region, the Gulf region, we have 27 areas.
on appelle classifiées.
And so they are classified and tests are done by ECCC and CFIA. They give us recommendations and we act on them. There are areas which are called unclassified. These areas are generally not tested. They remain open. Fishery activities are not banned there, but there are awareness campaigns and sometimes posters are put up on beaches and which say that fishing is not recommended in these areas because there are risks. We don't know exactly what they are. And so the types of contaminations for Madame Godet or whoever else, the type of contamination that we see on our coasts, while there are a lot of cottages, a lot of homes, and a lot of these residences were built a long time ago, and they have septic systems that are no longer sufficient. And when there are big storms, so when there's a lot of rain, it may mean that a lot of water will flow toward the coast and that will bring contaminants.
Est-ce que vous n'en voyez plus?
Do you see more of these contaminants given the warming of the waters? Is it more present now than it was in previous years? Thank you for the question. I think I will ask one of my colleagues from ECCC to answer you, given that they're the ones who do the tests.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're seeing more and more emergency closures as a result of rain.
De fosse septique.
There's also the question of septic systems, which can have issues, and as a result of climate change, we're seeing more rain and more emergency closures as a result. Over the last number of years, and I'm speaking about my region, but if it's happened elsewhere, has there been mortality or poisonings involving people who have consumed these mollusks?
Certaines régions qui étaient
in certain regions that were tested or where the test was negative, but people were nonetheless poisoned. And have there been any deaths? Are you familiar with these data?
So I can speak about the biotoxin closures that may have happened. So in the Baie, the Chaleur Bay, La Baie des Chaleurs, we have not had any biotoxin closures in the last 5 years in the area. Just for some statistics, in 2025-2026, there were over 9,000 samples that were tested. 26% of them were around from the Quebec area. And as a result of the testing for marine biotoxins, there were over 1,300 recommendations to open or close in the Pacific, 42 in Quebec, and 81 in Atlantic Canada.
But my question was, did we have any mortality, like in human, like in people, or did we have any like intoxication or cases that we know that, in area that was open or that was closed, did that happen in some region?
Sorry. Yes, thank you so much for the question. So I believe that during this time in 2025-26, we had one recall, which would be a contamination issue that was impacting human health.
D'accord. Madame Godet, juste pour...
Okay, Ms. Godet. Do provinces have a role to play in this testing, or is it just the federal government? Are we working with third parties? You probably know the institute in Sheboygan that does this kind of thing. Or is it just the federal government, or the provinces have a role to play, or do we work with third parties? If you could answer very quickly, the time is almost up.
Alors, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. We work with the provinces, but in terms of testing, it's strictly our colleagues from Environment Canada. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses for having come here. I'm happy that we're talking about soft shell clams in Gaspésie and Baie des Chaleurs during our first committee meeting at the end of March. A few days afterward, someone in Bonaventure brought together 150 people who were asking for the opening of the soft shell clam fishery. It's very important for us in Gaspésie. It's part of our culture, the Micmac. We're also asking for it to be opened. And since then, we've received resolutions from Scriminac, from Bonaventure, from Carleton, Gaspésie, from representatives of the area who are asking us to find a way to open more sites for the soft shell clam. So how can we do so? Currently, all the requests that have been made are refused categorically, and we're told there are no resources. So let us touch upon the question of food, of safety. And so I'll start with Environment Canada. Ms. Volk, have recent tests been done in the southern area of Gaspésie, in the Baie des Chaleurs region, that would show that the water is not suitable for harvesting soft-shell clams? Thank you for the question. I'm going to pass the floor to my colleague to answer you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. In certain areas, tests have been done, but in 2 regions, analyses were supposed to have been done on wastewater discharge, and some data were generated from this. These data have been either made public or will be soon made public. So analyses have been done in some areas. Which areas? I'll have to get back to you with the specific information to tell you exactly where this data is coming from. At the current time, Environment Canada is doing water testing even in areas where there's no soft shell fishery.
Président, Environnement Canada fait des tests.
Environment Canada does tests in areas that are identified,
Qui sont identifiés déjà. Ça veut pas dire que c'est partout.
which are already identified. That doesn't mean the tests are happening everywhere, but there are areas that have been identified. I understand that tests are being done at Miguasha, where there's a site. Sometimes at Saint Thomas, which is nearby, at Port Daniel or Douglastown. But between these areas where the fishery is not currently allowed and where there are many of these soft-shell clams, do you do tests there? I'll have to get back on the specific sites where the tests are happening. But the subject of our study is the opening of the soft-shell fishery in Baie des Chaleurs. So I would like for you to have information on the Baie des Chaleurs region. I understand that you'll answer us in writing to tell us whether tests have been done. So, Ms. So, in terms of the CFIA, have tests been done on soft-shell clams, on their flesh that has shown that they are not suitable for consumption over the last number of years?
In the Baie des Chaleurs, we have 4 monitoring stations for biotoxins. They are the ones on the harvest sites that have been classified as open or for harvesting. I don't know exactly which of the regions there are, but there is a map. And over the past 5 years, we haven't had any biotoxin concerns from that area.
OK. Donc, vous avez fait des tests dans 4 sites différents.
So you've done tests in 4 different areas in Baie des Chaleurs, and over the last 5 years, no test has shown that the mollusk's flesh was not suitable for consumption. That's correct. So in a report we see, and this question is for DFO, but our other witnesses could also respond. A report was done in 2022, a horizontal assessment of the Canadian mollusk safety program. And so in 2022, we were told that there was a lack of resources, whether it's the agency, Environment Canada, or the DFO, they've reached their maximum capacity. So my question is perhaps for Ms. Vézina, given that you're responsible for Quebec, so is this still the case? Thank you, Chair, for the question. As for our region, the resources that we have allow us to provide the program that is provided through DFO, and it's to ensure that the
L'Agence canadienne d'inspection des aliments nous confirme qu'il n'y a pas de toxicité dans les mollusques. Nous, on ouvre ou on ferme les zones de pêche. Puis on fait
Pourquoi
aussi.
est-ce qu'au mois de décembre, j'ai soumis une demande écrite pour ouvrir de pêche au coq à Carleton et un autre à Bonaventure? Et la réponse que j'ai eue, c'est qu'il n'y avait pas les capacités financières, matérielles pour faire les tests.
OK. Ah ben ça, c'est qu'est-ce que vous faites référence, c'est d'ajouter des nouveaux sites.
Pardon,
Moi, qu'est-ce que je... Oui.
Pardon. Je dois interrompre. On n'a pas de translation. Je vais...
OK.
Une minute ici. I'm going to keep speaking here and see.
Allô, allô? Y a-t-il quelqu'un? Y a-t-il quelqu'un? Oui, d'accord. Nous avons l'interprétation. OK, the interpretation is working now. I'm going to give you a little bit more time, and you have 45 seconds, okay? So, Mr. Vézina, I'm going to ask you the question again. So, is it still the case that you do not have enough resources to open new sites for clam in Gaspésie? When it comes to opening or closing harvesting source, we do not have any issues with resources. Of course, if we want to open new zones, and I'm going to leave my colleagues of the other department to talk about their mandate. We must have various research with the quality of the water, things like this, but I will let them respond to this. But the mandate of our department says that there's no danger, so we only worry about execution, the enforcement of the law. But is the CFIA or Environment Canada in the last year, did they give you a recommendation to open new harvesting site in Gaspésie? No, we have not done that. I'm sorry, we have to go this very shortly. No, we have not received any recommendation for new openings recently anyway. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
Questions with Mr. Small for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for taking part in this valuable study. My question to Mr. Struthers, we had witnesses to this study previously who said that one of the main problems with accessing new clam harvesting areas is that there are 3 federal departments involved in the process, and in the province of Quebec, there's a 4th provincial department that's involved in the decision-making. How efficient can the process be with all of these government departments that have to communicate, and to the public they have a reputation of not communicating? I'm not sure, I'm not into the bureaucratic system here, but how efficient can this possibly be?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I believe each department has their own specific mandate to be able to address. So from Fisheries and Oceans, we're responsible for the management of the fishery, the enforcement. Our colleagues are responsible for water quality sampling and biotoxin sampling. And they each have the necessary expertise within their departments to be able to conduct those. and no expertise rests with a single department to be able to manage the entire process.
I've got a question. So when one of the departments are slacking, and they're not bringing forward their sampling on time or whatnot, who's in charge? Who dishes out the penalties and gives a few slaps to get people moving?
Well, I think thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think as our colleagues have mentioned in their opening statements, that there is no one single department that is the overall lead for the CSSP. Each department has a role to play. But your department determines the openings and closings. So you have to deal with colleagues on your left and right. How often do you talk to Ms. Zhu or Ms. Volk in a run of a year? In the run of a year, we speak to them actually fairly often. In particular, I speak with my director level colleagues at the agency and at Environment Canada. I speak with at minimum every 2 weeks.
To Ms. Volk, 50 years ago, there was no need for this bureaucratic nonsense. The people who lived on the coast knew when the clams were safe to eat. So how would you rate the quality of the water in terms of, I guess it's lack of toxins or bioagents or whatnot? How's the water quality changed in the last 30 to 40 years, to your knowledge?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for the question. I too come from Atlantic Canada, and I'm very proud to have harvested shellfish most of my life as well as a recreational fisher. I would defer to my colleague specifically on the quality of the water and the change. He has noted already we see a frequency of extreme events related to storms owing a lot to climate change. So we can point to indicators like that would point to
some extremely dry years, drought years in the last 5 years. Probably 4 out of the last 5 were with years with much less rainfall than or precipitation than normal.
Yes, thank you again.
Is that not fair?
Thank you again for the question. Climatologically, year to year, we do have variability, but we do know over time, owing to things like climate change, that the number of closures or the incidents that promote a closure are increasing. So certainly there would be annual variation within that general trend. But for more specific information, I would turn to my colleague if we have time to address the question further. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, as I indicated, we do have an increased number of emergency closures due to rainfalls. There's also densification that is contributing. There's also the challenges with wastewater treatments and septic systems that are aging. There isn't a specific study that I know of that has monitored and quantified that over time, but in general, that's what we're seeing. That
data, though, you must. I mean, you've got a world of AI and quantification available to you. You can't plot that on a chart, or, I mean, if one would think that water quality in Atlantic Canada has gone way up with the increases in standards and the new treatment centers and whatnot that have went in all over the place based on new laws, environmental laws.
Something that we are actually looking at as we're improving our data management system, also to look at the patterns over a longer period of time, while our focus is specifically on responding to emergency closures at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Small. Next, we're going to go to Mr. D'Entremont for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to join the committee once again. I did want to underline one person that is here that we didn't underline, but Mr. Malello is also here joining us, so it's good to see Eric here as well. I just wanted to, well, I mean, he looked left out, so I had to include him in the discussion here. So, listen, clams in Nova Scotia. I get to be Minister of Health, Minister of Aquaculture and Fisheries for a number of years, and the agreement we always had with the Department of DFO and maybe CFIA, maybe less with Department of Environment, is that there was a number of closed beaches that were identified. They were identified. They were then qualified as aquaculture sites. and then companies that had depuration capabilities were the ones that sort of came in and sort of managed the leases per se. I wouldn't say that they permitted the harvesters, but the harvesters normally work for the company that has the depuration, so they were able to sell the product back and forth. Is that experience used across Canada, or is that something more specifically that we use in Nova Scotia?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The product or the process of depuration is not used very widely. It is used somewhat in Nova Scotia. It's also used a little bit in BC, but it is generally not a very widely used process.
So that brings me to the question of why. I mean, we have a couple of very successful companies in Nova Scotia, Innovative Fisheries being one of them in my constituency of Acadie-Annapolis, and I'm just wondering why wouldn't that be used in places where, you know, we're trying to start up a fishery and not sort of come up with the same kind of partnering agreement with the provincial government?
Thank you for the question. I suspect that the reason is that certainly from an aquaculture perspective, most of the aquaculture sites are located in waters that are cleaner and then therefore don't require the process for relay and depuration. From a recreational or commercial wild capture, I'm less familiar with those particular harvest volumes, but I suspect it's probably based on the volume of product that's going through and whether or not it's economically feasible.
Well, I invite you on down to come and check out the process that we do have in Nova Scotia, because it is one that really works, and they do have their own partnership with CFIA. Of course, it's a CFIA inspected plant. I don't know exactly who does the testing or how the testing's done to make sure that the products that are coming out of that fish plant are appropriate, but they are shipping their product to the U.S. and other parts in Canada. So, you know, their process is working from a testing standpoint, and some of these closed, I would call them quote unquote closed bays that they're working in were areas that were contaminated. And were sort of brought back in some cases. So maybe in the Baie Chaleur or in the Gulf St. Lawrence, you know, maybe there's some opportunity to use some of that technology across the system, which I hope that, you know, fisheries would sort of take on. The next question that I come with probably is not quite as friendly, but when it comes to because I kind of agree with some of the questioning that Mr. Arnold was asking, is that there seems to be three different groups that are involved in this, and this comes from an instance that I had a number of years ago when I was MLA in the area for Barrington Bay, Cape Island, and in that area there was a bait clam fishery, and in order to go and get the bait clams, they weren't able to because it was closed, even if it was used for bait, because of environment. So environment wasn't testing those waters at that time, and it took us almost 10 years to get it identified again. So how do we sort of square that circle? Like because having three organizations involved in a fishery is difficult at best. So how do we sort of fix or streamline that process? And I don't know who wants to take that one.
Thank you for the question. Perhaps I'll start and my colleagues can jump in. And first of all, I want to say how much I appreciate the frustration of people who want to harvest shellfish and the inability to do that everywhere as people would like. At Environment and Climate Change Canada, we do the best we can, honestly, with the resources that we have, and are trying to work creatively with provinces, for example, in Nova Scotia would be an example, to understand how we can work collectively differently to enable others to help us, I guess, expand our ability within the program. So that is a work in progress and something that we are committed to doing. I will say as well, working with our partners collectively to try and balance where the resources are applied against the three constituents who harvest, and that being the economic sector, the recreational sector, and the food social ceremonial sector.
So I'm afraid I'm going to have to jump in. We're over time. If you could just
Okay,
complete
I'm
that
done.
answer,
Thank
and
you.
we're going to have to go to the next.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. D'Entremont. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes pour...
And now Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Vézina, to continue our discussions, and I expected, well, my goal was to understand why are there not more softshell clam sites open in Baie des Chaleurs and Gaspésie? Because the demand is very high. And my assumption was that there was a lack of resources. And so it seems to be more complicated than this. Despite this strong demand, you're saying I did not receive any recommendation to open new sites. The CFIA has just told us that over the last 5 years, tests were done in Baie des Chaleurs and that no problems in terms of toxins were discovered. And there's oyster farms that exist there. Environment Canada is telling us that they have done water testing, and you're telling us that you aren't lacking resources for the program. So why aren't there more softshell clam sites open in Baie des Chaleurs? Over the years, in the Baie des Chaleurs, there were about 65 distinct sites for softshell clams. And for these 65, 4 are open for harvesting, but the other ones were closed over the years because of the presence of pollution that made the shellfish inedible. And all these areas are not tested now, so all the tests that are done to maintain the already open sites open. So the reason that we're not opening the new sites is because we're not going to test at Saint-Sémillon, Bonaventure, Carleton, Escuminac. Is that right? That's right. And I understand that there's a lack of resources for this. And we need to provide resources if these tests are done. Should it be in Environment Canada and the CFIA? Yes. I will refer the question to my colleagues. They can confirm this. But that's basically it. Madame Vogt, how many more people will you need so that we can do the tests in order to open these sites in Baie des Chaleurs? Thank you for the question. I'm going to pass the floor to Arash to answer you. At the current time, in the Quebec region, we spend about 1.6 million per year for sampling and oversight. This is an amount that has increased over the last number of years. And it would be difficult to say that how much it would require, because we're talking about a number of years of tests. And there's no certainty that the data would allow us to reopen the sites. Generally speaking, it's about 50,000 per year for each region. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
Couple rounds of questions here for 4 minutes each, starting with Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to bring it to light here that in 2012, the Conservative government introduced wastewater treatment standards for municipalities, and those standards were to take effect in 2020 to require at least minimal treatment for wastewater from municipalities. And then in 2020, the then Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Jonathan Wilkinson, introduced amendments to the wastewater treatment effluent regulations that allowed the extension of deadlines for municipalities to upgrade their sewage treatment standards. Some of those extensions reach out to 2040, 20 years later than originally planned. Would improved wastewater treatment standards reduce the risk of contamination and the risk to human illness and death if those standards had been implemented?
Merci. Thank you for the question. Not being an expert in wastewater technology or infrastructure, there is a correlation between infrastructure that's degrading or older infrastructure and pollution sources. So we could say that.
Okay, if you can't answer the question, I'll ask it to Ms. Sue. Would you have to sample less sites, or would you be identifying fewer potential contaminant sites had those wastewater treatment standards been applied?
So for the CSSP program, we're monitoring marine biotoxins, which is a different.
So who's monitoring wastewater, Mr. Shashavari?
Mr. Chair, it wouldn't have reduced our sampling frequency because we have to meet certain standard in terms of the number of samples we collect over time to meet international standards to be able to maintain.
But would it have reduced the number of potential contamination sites that you identify?
Again, Mr. Chair,
you started out the statements when you, at the beginning of the meeting, said that you identify potential sites of contamination. If those wastewater treatment sites had their standards applied, would those have been applied, and would it have reduced the potential sites that you have to identify?
Mr. Chair, it would not have reduced the number of sampling that we would have to do in order to meet the standards to be able to do exports to international markets.
I'll turn the rest of my time over to Mr. Gunn.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Mr. Struthers, could you give a rough estimate of the value of aquaculture to the Canadian economy and possibly a breakdown by coast?
I can get back to you in writing on the exact numbers, but at the risk of writing an error or committing giving you the wrong number, we can get back to you with a detailed breakdown.
Okay. Do you have a rough estimate of the percentage that, obviously we're talking a lot about clams here, but that salmon aquaculture would be as a proportion of the entire aquaculture industry?
It's a very significant amount. It's 70–80% of the overall value of
the reason I asked is obviously a lot of concern in my riding. I'm out in British Columbia about what's going on with the transition plan. And I think just generally, whether it's salmon or other forms of aquaculture, ensuring that decision-making at DFO is being driven by science and not politics and ideology. So do you have an update on what's going on with this transition plan and what I should be telling to the 4,000 people who are wondering if they're going to have a job in 6 months?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The Government of Canada recognizes the importance of salmon aquaculture for the BC economy. On September 20th, 2024, the government published a draft salmon aquaculture transition plan. This plan served as a basis for consultations and engagement. Since then, the government's interdepartmental task force has conducted over 120 engagements with First Nations and stakeholders. The work has provided a deeper understanding of the industry and the regional economy, as well as the diverse views on the transition. The government is reviewing all of the different perspectives and considering how it can best move sustainable aquaculture forward in British Columbia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. And we're going to complete this panel with 4 minutes with Mr. Cormier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank our witnesses. And I'm going to use my time to move the following motion. And unsurprisingly, this is a motion that I provided a few weeks ago. It's on Atlantic salmon. So would you like for me to read it again? I can read it again. And I think that the clerk has the motion on Atlantic salmon that can be shared with the members of the committee. Is that all right with you? If you could read it. It was sent to all members by email, but we have new members in the committee, and I think that it would be good to repeat it. So it reads as follows: the committee recognized that Atlantic salmon populations are experiencing a critical and ongoing decline in several rivers in New Brunswick, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Atlantic salmon is an iconic species essential to the balance of aquatic ecosystems and to the economic, cultural, and social vitality of many coastal and indigenous communities. Despite conservation efforts undertaken in recent years, Salmon returns remain at historically low levels. The rapid and unprecedented growth of the striped bass population in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence, particularly in the Miramichi River, has resulted in increased predation pressure on smolts and juvenile salmon, raising serious concerns about the survival of Atlantic salmon in adjacent rivers. Predation by seal populations in eastern Canada is also a concerning factor affecting the survival of Atlantic salmon, both in estuarine environments and at sea. Without timely and appropriate management measures regarding predator populations, this could compromise efforts to restore Atlantic salmon stocks. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake an urgent study of no more than 4 meetings on the decline of Atlantic salmon, with consideration given to the impact of the current striped bass population in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence and predation by seals. Available scientific data on management measures, as well as concrete options that could be implemented rapidly to restore Atlantic salmon populations. As a part of this study, the committee invite to appear representatives from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, salmon conservation organizations, outfitting operators, recreational fishing guides affected Indigenous communities, and independent scientists specializing in population dynamics. The committee reported its findings and recommendations to the House, and pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests the government to table a comprehensive response to its report. So, Chair, this study is very important for me, but especially for people who have been trying to save the species for years. In my region and throughout New Brunswick, in Quebec, in Nova Scotia, in Newfoundland and Labrador, Atlantic salmon is not only a fish species, but it's part of our identity. It's in our DNA. It's been in our culture for hundreds of years.
Mr. Chair, fly fishing for Atlantic salmon, for example, this fishery support local economy. It brings visitors from around the world, sustain outfitters, guide local businesses, create jobs in rural region. So when we talk about salmon, we also talking about livelihood. Moi, je pêche le saumon depuis 25 ans.
I've been fishing salmon for 25 years. I've been able to fish on all kinds of rivers in New Brunswick, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and these have been very important moments in my life. And along with the nature that we're surrounded by, it's part of our land.
Concerning Atlantic salmon population are in critical decline, and return are historically low, and at the same time we are seeing increased pressure on the species, including the rapid growth of striped bass population, for example, in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence, and particularly in the Miramichi River, as well as predation from seal, and of course a lot of other factors. Alors on ne peut pas rester les bras croisés.
So we can't rest on our laurels, because if the species of salmon disappears, we'll only be losing fish, but we'll be losing jobs, traditions, and a part of our history and culture. It's been centuries that we've been involved in this fishery. This study is very important. It's essential. And I hope that the majority of the members of this committee will allow us to move forward with this study in order to find solutions to help this population, which is for me an iconic species in Canada. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier.
Members, this was put on notice a couple of months ago, so this is an order to be moved. I know we have folks that want to get involved in the debate. I just want to confirm with members that they're in agreement that we can let the witnesses or excuse the witnesses while we continue this debate. Okay, great. So with that, I just want to thank our witnesses for being here today, taking the time to meet with us and providing your testimony on this study. And the recommendations, or to help inform the recommendations, I just will note that there were a few questions with some requests for some follow-up information on the monitoring, the mapping. So if there is other information that you can share with the committee, that would be much appreciated for us to finalize that report. But with that, thank you very much for your time here today. So we are keeping a speaking list for the motion here. I first had Monsieur Deschênes. Et après ça, j'avais Monsieur Arnold.
And after that, Mr. Arnold.
Monsieur Deschamps.
Mr. Deschamps, I welcome the motion from our colleague. It's an excellent idea. I support it, and I would ask the clerk if a few amendments could be sent. I grew up in Cascapedia near a very important salmon fishery location, and so I understand the importance of the salmon fishery in our culture, and I welcome this idea of studying the decline of the salmon, and we should together find ways to support this species to protect our culture and our economy. I had a conversation with Pierre Damour, who is a well-known guide on the Estigouche River, and he spoke to me about the importance of the striped bass on this river, and he suggested that we perhaps establish a commercial fishery for this species. We shall see. And so the amendments that I'm proposing that have been sent to you seek to allow us to have a broader study on the potential causes, because we observe the striped bass as well as seals and in areas where there's neither striped bass nor seals, there's nonetheless a decline of the Atlantic salmon. And so this is why I'm proposing that in the context of this study that we take a look at what's going on in the Strait of Belle Isle between Quebec and Newfoundland, because we know there are some salmon that go all the way to Greenland, and so the Quebecois Salmon Federation thinks that there's a certain raised mortality as a result of this. And so I'm going to propose the following amendments. So after point adjacent and predation, that we add that the decline is also observed in areas where striped bass are scarce or absent, which underscores the importance of examining mortality factors during marine and estuarine migration more broadly. And I would also move the paragraph that says pursuant to Standing Order 1082, after the word study, that we say we also take a look at the striped bass population in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and seal predation, as well as mortality factors in terms of migration in the entirety of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, notably in the Strait of Belle Isle. Thank you, Mr. Deschamps. So Mr. Deschamps has moved an amendment. All of the members should have this amendment in their email. So we will continue the debate on the amendment.
Would you like to speak to this, or would you?
Not on this.
Okay, so maybe we'll go to Mr. Cormier, who I think wants to speak on the amendment from Mr. Deschamps.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Écoutez, moi, je suis très d'accord.
I am in support of Mr. Deschamps' amendments, even if we would have studied these things even without these amendments, but this only strengthens the motion, so I agree with the amendments that are currently on the table from Mr. Deschamps. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. Does anyone else want to make a comment? No?
Are we in agreement with the amendments from Monsieur Deschamps? Okay. So we have agreement around the table, so the motion is now amended accordingly. With that, we're going to go back to the speakers list. I have Mr. Arnold and then Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to make a further amendment to the motion. I'd have to look closer to see where it should be fit in, but I believe that I'd like to move that at the beginning of the study, we invite officials from Department of Fisheries and Oceans to update the committee on actions taken in response to the report from the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans of January 2017, 42nd Parliament, first session.
And the striped bass study.
Was there and if there, that would be one, and then just got to look up the, there was also a study on striped bass.
One full meeting on that, please.
There we go. It would also include having the officials in to report on actions on the study. I can't see.
Right here,
Impact of the rapid increase of striped bass in the Miramichi River and the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
One full meeting?
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. So I just will note we do have, as part of this motion, a request to have representatives from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to be able to appear. It's in there already. So
it's in there already, but I would like it specifically for them to report on actions taken in response to the recommendations in those two reports. And the second report on striped bass, I'm just bringing it up here. Report number 1 in the 43rd Parliament from the committee.
I'm assuming this is a report that was done in the previous government.
These are reports that were done by FOPO committee.
Number 1.
The
43rd.
The Atlantic salmon study was wild Atlantic salmon in eastern Canada. That was January of 2017 that was tabled, and for some reason I can't get the.
My question was, do you want them to present a written report, an update on it, or verbal?
The
So
Department
would
of
that come
Fisheries
out in the
committee.
questioning?
Just want to remind members to wait till I address them or to recognize them before speaking, because I know we do have a speaking list here already. I know Mr. Small wanted to speak on this, but now we're moving on to amendment. I see first we had Mr. Morrissey and then. Okay. Well, maybe let's first go to Mr. Small because he was next on the list, and then we'll go to Mr. Morrissey and Mr. Cormier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think it's very important to have some answers on what's been done in relation to these previous two reports, because oftentimes we feel like we're wasting our time here making recommendations in these reports and nothing gets done. So there was a report already that's been published from this committee on Atlantic salmon, and there's been one on striped bass. There was one on mackerel. It's on and on and on and on, and we make these great recommendations, all-party recommendations that we agree on, and it seems like the reports go out of here and nothing happens. So I certainly support my colleague's amendment, at least to try to let them know that they need to be accountable to the people, because we bring witnesses in here from our communities, stakeholders from various regions. It's their opportunity to have their say. And they go out of here, and 2 years later, they put their heart and soul into their testimony here at this committee, and they walk away and say, what a waste of time. There's no hope. But anyways, at least Mr. Arnold's amendment, if it gets accepted, we'll let these government officials know, and the government know, that we mean some sort of business here. Now, I don't know how Mr. Cormier feels, but I'm sure he has to be a little frustrated coming from New Brunswick and in an area that has a very dense population of striped bass. He has to be frustrated beyond all measures. And I see he has his hand up, so that's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Next, I have Mr. Morrissey, then Mr. Cormier, and Mr. Connors. I'm not sure if you wanted to get on the speaking list as well. So first, we'll go to Mr. Morrissey.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the same people were invited in the motion, so they will be here. And I agree with that they should be questioned, but establishing the first meeting to have them in, that I cannot support. They're going to come, and Mr. Arnold will have his chance to question them on anything then, as well as the reference to the earlier reports are factual, and we would welcome them as well coming in, because I believe Mr. Arnold was there, he and I were on the study that he referenced in 2017. So I'd like that, but establishing that they come in the first meeting, I prefer to hear directly from the people involved. The department officials are coming in, and they can be questioned whenever they're scheduled. But I supporting them coming at the first meeting is no.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrissey. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Cormier.
Well, Mr. Chair, Mr. Morrissey just basically resumed what I was about to say. So look, in my motion, we invite them. My colleague, Mr. Small and Mr. Armand, will be able to ask officials all the questions they want about the previous report. I want to hear from people on the ground, those guides, those outfitters also. I want to hear from people that we don't actually hear sometime at this committee on this topic. So when official will come, they will be able to ask all the questions they want to those officials.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Next, I have Mr. Connors on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll speak through the chair. Mr. Morrissey and Mr. Cormier summed up everything that I was trying to say, is that if we have the officials here, which they're already invited, everybody will get an opportunity to be able to ask questions to them. And I think that we should hear from the people who are involved with the industry first before we talk to the DFO.
Okay, I got Mr. Arnold and then Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This motion is going to become public, and I think the public deserves to know that this committee has studied the issue of Atlantic salmon previously and studied the striped bass issue previously. I think they need to know that off the top.
And pinnipeds.
So I still support having those two studies in particular listed in the motion that Department of officials from the Fisheries and Oceans appear to answer to or to respond to questions on what actions have been taken on those two reports. And the second report was actually tabled in the House February 28th, 2022. So there's no question as to which reports we're speaking about.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know my colleague referenced the striped bass study from 2019 and the Atlantic salmon study from 2017. And then from 2023, we had the pinniped study, which is seals, sea lions, and walruses. There's been a lot of work done by this committee to shed some light on the difficulties that salmon stocks are having in recovering, especially with predation. We've just had an $82 million announcement to help the health of Atlantic salmon. And at the same time, the Mactaquac Biodiversity Center in New Brunswick gets shut down. So if this government is serious, if Mr. Cormier is serious, he should be using his influence with the minister to push on her and lean on her to get her going in the right direction. It's just not good enough. And in Newfoundland and Labrador, this year, our river guardians haven't had any notification yet, Mr. Chair, of whether or not they're going to have their jobs. It's never went this late before in terms of hiring river guardians than it has right now. And all of this after the minister came out and made the big rah-rah announcement, we're investing $82 million in the survival of Atlantic salmon and to make Atlantic salmon more plentiful. But in just a in a 2-month period here, we've had the announcement that the Mactaquac Biodiversity Center in New Brunswick is going to be closed. And we haven't even hired on our river guardians in Newfoundland and Labrador yet. So if you don't protect the spawners, and if you don't stop the predation, the poaching, and whatnot, and the habitat degradation, how in the world are we ever going to see Atlantic salmon stocks come back to their prosperity? It's impossible. But, you know, we can do another study. I want to do a study. Hope maybe someone will listen this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Then I had Mr. Connors, and then I have Mr. Morrissey.
So my only point would be that all those studies that was just spoken about, they're all public documents. The public can access those documents whenever they want, and if they want to get information on them, I'm sure they can reach out and get information on them as well.
Mr. Morrissey.
Chair, I would move that we vote on the amendment currently under debate.
We need to finish the debate on this. Mr. Arnold.
No, I stand corrected. It appears the striped bass report was actually tabled 3 times, but because of parliamentary prorogation, etc., it was actually the final time it was tabled appears to have been the 44th Parliament on January 22nd. The government response appears to be June 22nd, 2022. These studies that we've already done need to be fully disclosed to everyone that is going to be considered in this study. That whether that's the public watching this committee, and I've seen the number of people following this committee grow exponentially over the last number of years because they know the good work that this committee does, the congenial work that this committee does time after time. We put the partisanship aside so that we can do the right thing for the harvesters and the fish stocks. We have done that repetitively over the years. There's been good work across the aisles from both sides. And I'd hate to see that sidelined at this point because Canadians deserve the best that we can do. Those 2 reports, the one on Atlantic salmon and then the second on striped bass, are very relevant to this proposed study. The public and anyone interested in this committee need to be fully aware that those 2 studies and reports took place. If they aren't aware of that, it would be shameful. Shame on us for not bringing that to light. Yes, it can come up in questioning in one meeting with the government officials, but by the time the word gets out that there were previous reports, it may be too long or too late for people to send us questions that we should be asking of those officials as to that would be very relevant to why now, after 4 years on the one study and 8 years on the Atlantic salmon study, why are we still in the predicament of studying the plight of Atlantic salmon? If recommendations were in those 2 reports that could have made a difference, why would we not want to have that come to light as soon as possible in this study? To hide it is, I think, would be absolutely shameful.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Mr. Small has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I echo my colleagues' comments. This committee has gotten along pretty good, but hearing Mr. Morrissey's comment, Mr. Connor's commentary earlier, it seems like, you know, the power is here now. We've got the majority. We're going to use our muscle and vote this down to bury the fact that extensive work has been done around this table and the results of which have been denied. You know, that report on Atlantic salmon was 8 years ago. That's 8 years of decline. That's 8 years of folks out there blaming things like open net pen salmon farming on the demise of wild fish. Yet, the recommendations in that report 8 years ago, and the analysts are here listening, and they give their heart and soul as well, Mr. Chair, in producing great documents and helping us get the recommendations out that reflect the will of the people. And now we're going to go to a vote and have the Liberal government vote down our recommendation to have an extra meeting to address the work that has or has not been done to back up the recommendations from previous reports. Maybe it'll encourage us to think that we're not wasting our time here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Small. So with that, let's go to a vote. So this is on the amendment to the motion as amended. So this is to Mr. Arnold's amendment to the motion that was from Mr. Cormier, but then amended by Mr. Deschamps.
Mr. Connor?
Mr. Chair, just a clarification. I just want to make sure we're voting on Mr. Arnold amendment right now, right?
Correct.
Perfect.
Mr. Connors? Monsieur Cormier?
No.
Mr. D'Entremont? Dr. Fry?
No.
Mr. Klassen?
No.
Mr. Morrissey?
No.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr. Melillo?
Yes.
Mr. Gunn?
Yes.
Mr. Small?
Yes.
Monsieur Simard?
Oui.
Nays contre 6, yeas pour 5.
The amendment is defeated. So we're back to the motion here. If there's not any more debate on it, let's go to a vote on that.
Mr. Connors? On the main motion as amended by the amendment of Mr. Deschamps.
Oui.
Monsieur Cormier?
Oui.
Monsieur D'Entremont?
Oui.
Dr. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Klassen?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Oui.
Mr. Melillo?
Yes.
Mr. Gunn?
Yes.
Mr. Small?
Oui.
Monsieur Simard?
Oui.
Yeas pour 11.
Okay. Great. So motion is adopted. So that takes us to the end of the public part of this meeting. I know we are at the time. I don't want to. We can't extend. Okay. Okay. So then I guess. I mean, it'll take us 15 minutes to go on camera. So maybe that's the time for us to wrap for today, rather than. Well, we're gonna. What we need to do next. I mean, there's a few things that we need to do. Drafting instructions for the clam study, but we want to make sure that we have Monsieur Deschamps for that. We also need to finalize the drafting instructions for the letter for the mackerel study, and we need to finish the report on the review of the Fisheries Act. Those are not things we're going to be able to complete at this time, so maybe it makes sense that we adjourn the meeting now. We're getting to 6 p.m. in 2 minutes. With that, the next meeting is going to be on Monday, where we will have department officials to be appearing on the factors determining the opening and closing dates of the harvesting seasons. So before we wrap, hand it over to Mr. Gunn here.
Just a question, Mr. Chair. On one of the other committees that I'm on, they've kind of worked on a bit of a plan of things that they want to get done before the summer break. Is that something that is done on most committees, or we have any interest in doing here?
I mean, it's something if we wanted to go on camera, we can go through all of that. But I'm getting the sense that just given the delay that we had with the votes, that we're not going to have the opportunity to do that. But we will have some time in camera next week. We're going to go through a number of the items that I mentioned there, and it's a good time to plan ahead for the next weeks and months before we get to the summer recess. So with that, is the will of the committee to adjourn? Okay, meeting adjourned.